There is a bone. It is 70,000 years old. It sits in a museum case in a climate-controlled room, and most people walk past it without stopping. It is not dramatic to look at. It is not golden, not carved, not decorated. It is a Neanderthal femur, a thigh bone, buried deliberately beneath the earth, surrounded by flower pollen, ochre dust, and the carefully arranged remains of at least 8 other individuals. The archaeologists who excavated Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq in the 1950s were not expecting what they found. They were expecting bones. What they were not expecting was evidence that someone grieved. That detail, the flowers, the arrangement, the deliberate burial, has been debated for decades. Some scientists argue the pollen arrived by wind or by burrowing rodents. Others argue it was intentional. But here is the thing that neither side of that argument can deny. Whether or not the flowers were placed by hand, whoever buried that body dug a hole first. They lowered a person into it. They covered the body. They did not leave it to predators. They came back to the site multiple times. We know this because the bones are layered, the burials are sequential, which means this was not a single panicked response to death. It was a practice, a return, a ritual shaped by repetition. And that is where the real question begins. Not whether the flowers were placed deliberately. The real question is this: what did it take for a mind, a human or near-human mind, to look at a dead body and understand that something was finished? That the person inside that body was gone? That they would one day be the body in the ground? Because understanding death is not the same as experiencing death. Animals experience death. Elephants stand near the bodies of their dead for hours. Chimpanzees carry deceased infants for days. Crows conduct what researchers have called funeral behavior, gathering around a fallen bird in near silence before dispersing. Death awareness is not uniquely human. But something else is. The knowledge that you specifically, you individually, the one watching this, breathing this, thinking this, you are going to die. Not just that death happens. That it is coming for you. By name. By certainty. On an unknown date. That is a different kind of knowing entirely. And the bones in Shanidar Cave suggest that this knowing came earlier than we ever assumed. Here is what makes that femur more disturbing the longer you sit with it. For the burial to happen, for the digging, the arrangement, the return, the repeated use of the site, someone had to conceptualize absence. Had to understand that the person who was there, who breathed and moved and communicated, was now permanently unavailable. Not sleeping. Not gone temporarily. Gone in a way that had no reversal. That is an abstraction. A brutal, recursive abstraction. You cannot touch it, see it, or locate it in space. You can only observe its evidence, the stillness of the body, and infer from that stillness a conclusion that takes extraordinary cognitive architecture to reach. Something happened inside that isn't coming back. We don't know when exactly that cognitive architecture arrived. That is the honest answer, and the honest answer is what makes this subject so unsettling. Paleoanthropologists place early deliberate burials between 100,000 and 130,000 years ago for anatomically modern humans. But some evidence stretches further. Homo naledi, a small-brained hominin discovered in the Rising Star Cave system in South Africa and formally announced in 2015, appears to have placed bodies in a remote underground chamber deliberately, and the dating of some deposits suggests this may have happened 300,000 years ago. A 300,000-year-old creature, with a brain roughly one-third the size of yours, apparently doing something with its dead that was not accidental, not logistical, not random. The discovery shook assumptions because we had assumed intentional mortuary behavior required large brains, required language, required sophisticated symbolic thought. Homo naledi challenges that assumption at a foundational level, which means the question of when humans first understood death may be the wrong question. The question may actually be, what does it take to understand death at all, and what happened to the minds of every species that crossed that threshold? Look again at the bone. Look at what was left around it. The ochre is significant, a red pigment used across dozens of ancient sites, spread on bodies, on cave walls, on objects. Red. The color of blood. The color of life. Placed on the dead. This is not hygienic. It is not practical. It is meaning. Someone reached for a substance associated with living and applied it to the no longer living. That is not instinct. That is not biological programming. That is a mind trying to negotiate between what it knows and what it cannot accept. And that negotiation, between knowing and refusing to fully accept, is something that would define human consciousness from that moment forward. Here is the deeper implication that the burial site opens up. The moment a mind truly understands that death is coming for everyone, something else becomes necessary. Because you cannot hold that knowledge without doing something with it. It is too heavy. It is structurally destabilizing. If you are a creature with enough cognitive depth to understand personal mortality that you specifically will cease, then you are also a creature with enough cognitive depth to be paralyzed by it. And yet these ancestors were not paralyzed. They kept moving, kept hunting, kept building fires and raising offspring and migrating across continents. Which means they developed something to carry the knowledge. Something to place between themselves and the abyss of that awareness. Terror management theory, developed by social psychologists in the late 20th century, building on the philosopher Ernest Becker's work, argues that virtually all of human culture is, at its root, a response to death awareness. The monuments, the religions, the legacies, the tribal identities, the desperate need to be remembered, the stories that outlast the teller. Becker argued that these are not incidental features of civilization. They are the function of civilization. The entire human cultural project is, in this reading, a sophisticated mechanism for managing the knowledge that we are mortal. We build things that last because we cannot last. We tell stories because stories survive the storyteller. We love deeply because love feels like something death cannot fully extinguish. We create gods because gods do not die. Look at what came after those early burials. Cave paintings appeared, in Sulawesi, Indonesia, one hand stencil dated to at least 51,700 years ago, making it the oldest known representational art in the world. A hand pressed against stone. Pigment blown around it. Someone made sure their presence would outlast their body. That is not decorative impulse. That is a response to knowing. To understanding that the hand itself was temporary. To refusing, in the most primal possible way, to disappear entirely. Look at the burial goods that began appearing alongside the dead as mortuary practices became more elaborate. Tools, food, jewelry, ochre, symbolic objects. These are not random inclusions. They reveal a belief structure, or at least a hope structure, around what death means and what might follow it. You do not bury food with someone who you believe is simply gone. You bury food with someone you believe may need it. And the moment that thought occurs, the moment any human mind generated the sentence "they may need this where they are going," something functionally religious had begun. Not theology, not doctrine, but the raw seed of it, the refusal to believe that death is final, generated directly from the terror of knowing that it is. The burial in Shanidar Cave, whatever the flowers mean, however that debate settles, represents something singular. It is a moment frozen in time where a mind, or a group of minds, tried to do something about death. Not prevent it. Not deny it factually. But answer it. Make it mean something. Wrap it in gesture and pigment and deliberate arrangement, because raw knowledge without meaning is unbearable. Because the mind that can understand mortality is also a mind that cannot simply sit with mortality. It has to respond. It has to make the bones matter. And here is the reversal that archaeology quietly forces on every person who studies this long enough. We tend to think of death awareness as a burden, as the thing that separates us from easier, less conscious creatures. The knowledge that costs us sleep, generates existential dread, fills our anxiety with a background hum that never fully goes away. And it is that. It is genuinely that. But the evidence from these sites suggests something else as well. Death awareness may also be the origin of almost everything we call meaningful. The art, the ritual, the connection, the drive to leave something behind, the need to be known by other people before you vanish, the strange human compulsion to mark things, name things, remember things. If you knew you were going to live forever, would you bother? Would you feel urgency? Would anything feel precious? The Neanderthal who arranged those bodies in Shanidar Cave, or the group who did it, over generations, did not have a philosophy degree, did not have language the way we have language, did not have the capacity to articulate what they were doing or why. But they dug the hole. They lowered the person in. They came back. And in that returning, In that refusal to simply leave the dead to the earth without ceremony, something was declared. Something that 70,000 years of subsequent human behavior would repeat in 10,000 different forms. We know this is the end, and we are going to make it mean something anyway. That femur is still in the museum case. Still behind glass. Still mostly walked past by people who do not stop. But if you stop, if you really stop and look at it and understand what it represents, you are doing something the mind that buried it also did. You are standing over the dead and trying to think past the end. You are trying to hold the knowledge without being destroyed by it. And the fact that you can do that, the fact that you are doing it right now, is the longest continuous thread in human history. It began in a cave in northern Iraq, with a hole in the ground and pigment on bones, and someone who looked at the dead and understood, perhaps for the first time. That understanding changes everything. The question is not whether they knew. The evidence suggests they did. The question is what you do with the same knowledge they carried. Because you are carrying it too. Right now. You have been carrying it your whole life. And everything you have built around it, every relationship and habit and goal and fear and hope, is your version of the flowers in the cave. Your version of the ochre on the bones. Your answer to the thing they first discovered and could never undiscover. What is it that you are burying it with?